Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very long trip, so long in fact that we're going back thousands of years to a place most of you have probably never been. Picture this thick emerald forest mist curling through ancient valleys and not a single human footprint anywhere. You're standing in prehistoric New Zealand, where the air is damp, the ferns are massive and the animals, well, let's just say you probably won't survive this if you're not careful. Because tonight, you'll come face to face with giants. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first cautious steps into this strange world, your boots sinking slightly into the mossy ground. The light filters down through towering tree ferns, their enormous fronds swaying gently in the breeze. You can hear the distant calls of strange birds echoing through the thick undergrowth melodies entirely unfamiliar to your modern ears. The forest feels both alive and oddly empty at the same time. That's because New Zealand is unique. Unlike most places on Earth, there are no large land mammals here. No lions, no wolves, no bears, just birds. Birds rule this land, and none more so than the giants you're about to meet. You pause, feeling the ground tremble slightly beneath your feet. A soft, rhythmic thudding like distant drums. You squint through the foliage and suddenly they appear. Towering shadows glide between the trees. The first thing you see are their necks, long, slender, gently swaying like periscopes above the bushes. And then the bodies come into view, round solid like oversized ostrich torsos balanced on powerful sturdy legs. The moa. Some are nearly 3 meters tall, the biggest ones, the South Island giant moa, could reach as high as 12 feet. That's taller than most basketball players. In fact, if you stack 2 tall people on top of each other, you'd still need to stretch a bit to pat one of these birds on the head. The smaller species, though, are about your height, making them feel almost manageable. Almost. One of them spots you, or at least seems to. Its tiny head swivels atop that long neck, black eyes blinking lazily. But rather than panic, it simply continues munching on leaves, as though you're just another odd-looking tree. Moa had no natural fear of humans because until very recently in their history, they had never encountered one. You step closer and the full scale of this creature becomes clear. Its feathers are shaggy and hair-like, giving it a warm, fuzzy appearance. The plumage is mostly dark brown, blending perfectly with the earthy tones of the forest. Its beak sharp but narrow delicately plucks leaves from the bushes with surprising precision. Now here's your first quirky fact of the night. Despite being enormous, moa had no wings. Not even tiny vestigial ones like ostriches or emus. Their ancestors way back when lost their wings entirely, as they adapted to a world where flying simply wasn't necessary. No mammals, no big land predators. What's the rush? And yet, the evolutionary mystery remains. Historians and paleontologists still argue whether moa lost their wings after arriving in New Zealand or if their ancestors already had reduced wings before making the journey. The debate lingers like the mist swirling around your feet. You keep walking, careful not to startle the herd. A mother moa tends to her chick, a fluffy, awkward-looking little creature that scurries between her massive legs. You notice how calm everything feels. There's no sense of threat, no tension. Without predators, these birds live slow, deliberate lives, their only goal being to eat, mate, and raise their young. As you stroll deeper into the forest, you start to feel something a little eerie. It's not the moa themselves, it's the absence of something else. Where are the deer, The rabbits, the squirrels, the usual rustling and scurrying of mammals that fill other forests with life are completely missing here. New Zealand is a living experiment in what happens when birds take center stage in the animal kingdom. With no mammals to compete against or fear, birds like the moa could evolve into the giants you see before you. Nature filled every available niche with feathers instead of fur. You might even call it the Great Bird Experiment. And for millions of years, it worked beautifully. Until, of course, the story changes, which it always does. A cool breeze rustles through the leaves, and a distant screech pierces the quiet. You look up instinctively. High above, circling on wide, powerful wings, glides something far more intimidating than the peaceful moa, the Haast's eagle. You make a mental note. You'll be getting much closer to that apex predator soon enough. For now, though, you stay close to the moa, marveling at their sheer size and strange elegance. Watching them is oddly calming, like standing beside a living dinosaur, which in many ways you are. Birds, after all, are the last surviving dinosaurs. And just as you're starting to feel completely at peace, you hear another soft thud behind you. Another moa, even larger than the rest, steps into view, tilting its head as if studying your strange clothes and awkward posture. You resist the urge to laugh. Imagine explaining skinny jeans and smartphones to a creature that's been dead for centuries. The moa blinks once more, then resumes its slow, methodical feeding. You take a deep breath, letting the cool forest air fill your lungs, fully aware that you've just begun your long walk through this lost world. And if you think it's all going to be this peaceful, well, you might want to keep your eyes on the sky. You follow the winding path deeper into the ancient New Zealand forest, where shafts of sunlight filter through canopies of towering podocarps and southern beeches. The air is rich with earthy scents, damp moss, decaying leaves, and the faint sweetness of distant blossoms. Every now and then, the call of an unfamiliar bird echoes, but your attention remains fixed on the silent giants all around you. The moa are everywhere. You watch as a group of smaller bush moa quietly browses beneath the shadow of a massive southern rata tree, its crimson flowers splashing color against the deep greens. These moa stand about as tall as you, a bit more approachable, though still not exactly cuddly. Their feathers look like coarse bristles rather than the sleek plumes you'd see on modern birds. The color variations are subtle. Earthy browns, muted grays, and the occasional hint of rust. Red blending seamlessly into the undergrowth. Then suddenly, from behind a curtain of silver fern fronds, a true behemoth lumbers into view. This one easily towers over you, its head swaying almost lazily at the height of a second-story window. The South Island giant moa, Dinornis robustus, one of the tallest birds to ever walk the earth. You freeze for a moment, instinctively feeling like prey in the presence of such size. But the giant barely glances at you. It seems almost disinterested, more concerned with selecting the choicest leaves from the high branches that few other creatures can reach. And that's the thing, you quickly realize. These birds aren't built for speed or aggression. They're browsers, not hunters. While their legs are powerful, they aren't sprinters. Their huge size is purely a survival strategy, one made possible by their isolated island paradise. Here's your first mainstream fact to chew on. New Zealand split off from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana around 80 million years ago, drifting off into isolation, like some great lost raft of biodiversity. Without large mammals to challenge them, birds like the moa had the ecological freedom to grow, and grow they did. But their immense size came with trade-offs. Despite their intimidating height, moa were surprisingly vulnerable. You watch one carefully pluck tender shoots from a tall shrub, its head bobbing rhythmically. Its beak works methodically, stripping leaves with the precision of garden shears. A baby moa scuttles nearby, its tiny legs moving in a frantic blur, trying to keep pace with its towering parent. You sidestep to avoid startling the chick. The adults are peaceful, but you don't want to test whether a maternal moa could give you a swift kick. Fun fact, paleontologists estimate that a full-grown moa's kick could easily break a human femur if properly motivated. And while there's no official record of anyone being on the wrong end of one, you're not eager to volunteer. As you continue walking, you begin to notice that there's something almost hypnotic about the way the moa move. Their long necks sway in gentle arcs, their heads making slow circles as they scan for the best foliage. Occasionally, two will cross paths and exchange what can only be described as an awkward bobbing neck dance. Possibly a low-stakes dominance display or simply mutual curiosity. Either way, it's oddly charming. The forest around you hums with life, yet remains oddly silent in the mammalian sense. No squirrels darting up trees. No rabbits diving into burrows. Just the rustling of enormous feet through leaf litter, and the occasional whooshing wing beats of smaller birds flitting through the branches above. This brings us to the ongoing debate. Historians and evolutionary biologists still argue over exactly how and when the moa first arrived in New Zealand. Did their ancestors fly here millions of years ago only to lose the ability to fly as the generations passed? Or were they always flightless, having diverged from their ancient relatives before the continental drift even began? Some recent DNA studies suggest their closest cousins may have been tinamous from South America, a group that still retains the ability to fly, albeit poorly. But the full evolutionary story remains partly veiled like mist in the forest. You pause to rest near a shallow, clear stream. Across the water, several smaller moa dip their beaks to drink, their heads rising and falling with a slow, practiced rhythm. They are creatures of patience and caution. And as you sit there quietly, you start to realize just how profoundly peaceful this world feels, at least for now. Suddenly, you feel a light tap on your shoulder. Just kidding. That's only your imagination running wild. But if something did tap you, chances are it wouldn't be a moa. They're simply too indifferent. You're about as interesting to them as a passing cloud. Their real threats don't come from the ground but from above. As if on cue, a shadow briefly glides over the clearing. You glance upward, your heart involuntarily quickening. The Haast's eagle, larger than any eagle alive today, circles high in the sky, its sharp vision scanning for potential prey. That's a problem you'll face soon enough. For now, you're still safe among these enormous vegetarians. The moa resume. Their grazing, their gentle rustling once again filling the air. You start to pick up on subtle patterns in their behavior, how they tend to form loose, shifting groups rather than tight flocks. They spread out just enough to give each other feeding space, but stay close enough to maintain some social cohesion. You can't help but smile at one particularly bold chick who strays a little too far from its parent, flapping its tiny wings as though it might actually lift off the ground. Spoiler, it won't. Moa chicks, like their parents, are completely flightless. But hey, dream big, little guy. And so you continue your silent trek through this forgotten world surrounded by towering birds that seem almost like ancient monuments rather than living creatures. They've ruled these roads for millions of years, untouched by predators or hunters. For now, the morning mist lingers as you press deeper into the forest. With each step, the landscape subtly shifts: taller trees, thicker undergrowth, and even more of those giant swaying necks peeking through the greenery. You're now surrounded by moa of all shapes and sizes, and the question starts forming in your mind: where exactly did these bizarre giants come from? Time to untangle the family tree. The moa aren't some weird offshoot of ostriches or emus, though you might be forgiven for assuming that at first glance. No, their story is a little stranger and far older. Scientists believe moa belong to a group of birds called ratites, a family that includes flightless oddities like the ostrich cassowary kiwi and South America's rheas. But within that strange extended family, the moa are something like the tall distant cousins who showed up at the reunion, wearing feathers and towering over everyone else. Here's your mainstream fact: DNA evidence suggests that all ratites share a common ancestor, possibly a flying bird that lived tens of millions of years ago, when the great supercontinent Gondwana was still breaking apart. As Gondwana split into pieces, different groups of ratites evolved in isolation. Ostriches ended up in Africa, emus, and cassowaries in Australia, and the moa. They hit the genetic jackpot on New Zealand. Or did they? Because here's where the plot thickens, and where scientists still argue. Some researchers believe the ancestor of moa may have arrived in New Zealand by flying across the open ocean long after Gondwana's breakup. Others insist they were already grounded before New Zealand drifted away, evolving into giants, while the island remained isolated. It's like one big family mystery, where nobody can agree who inherited Grandma's wings. You stand still for a moment, watching a smaller upland moa strut gracefully across a rocky clearing. This species, adapted for cooler highland climates, is noticeably smaller and more compact than its lowland cousins. Its feathers look slightly denser, better suited to keep out mountain chill. The moa weren't just one bird, they were 9 distinct species, each adapted to different parts of the islands. Some stuck to the beaches, others the lowland forests, while a few, like this upland moa, claimed the colder heights. As you admire its careful steps over mossy stones, you notice its feet, broad, strong, built to handle the rough terrain. You wouldn't call them beautiful exactly, but they're marvels of engineering. With these sturdy legs, moa could cover large distances at a steady pace, wandering from one feeding ground to the next without much difficulty. Of course, you're probably wondering, without wings, how did they defend themselves? Well, mostly by not needing to. For millions of years, there simply weren't many threats. No lions, no wolves, no sneaky weasels waiting to pounce on their eggs. New Zealand was a paradise for big, slow vegetarians. The biggest concern any adult moa faced was where to find the next batch of juicy leaves. You catch a faint, earthy smell on the wind, a patch of large, broad-leaved horopedo bushes nearby. Several moa are gathered around it, reaching high into the branches. Interestingly, many of New Zealand's plants evolved alongside these giant grazers, developing thick, leathery leaves and chemical defenses to discourage overeating. Horopedo, for example, packs a peppery punch that might remind you of biting into a chili pepper. Yet here, these moas stand happily chewing away. Either they've built up tolerance or they simply don't care. And speaking of plant evolution, here's your quirky fact. For tonight, some New Zealand botanists have even argued that entire species of shrubs, trees, and ferns were sculpted by millions of years of moa snacking habits. With no mammals to act as grazers, the plants had to evolve against birds instead. Tough leaves, spiny branches, even chemical warfare, all responses to hungry beaks, rather than gnawing teeth. As you walk, your foot strikes a hard object beneath the moss. You kneel and brush away the green carpet to reveal a sun-bleached bone, thick, dense, and unmistakably large, perhaps part of a femur long abandoned. It's a quiet reminder that even in paradise, every creature eventually leaves only traces behind. But don't worry, our Moa friends aren't gone yet in this journey. Around you, life continues in its ancient rhythm. A large South Island giant moa ambles past, followed closely by two younger individuals. Their long necks bob, gently moving like slow, synchronized pendulums. The family resemblance is almost touching if you ignore the fact that their eyes seem to be permanently fixed in a state of mild confusion. And just as you're admiring this gentle procession, you hear that familiar rush of wind again. High above, the shadow of danger circles the Haast's eagle, always watching, always hunting. You make a mental note to stay in open spaces. You may not be on the menu, but frankly, you don't want to test the eagle's eyesight either. For now though, your focus remains on the moa living monuments to evolution's strange imagination. They are survivors of ancient continental shifts, masters of browsing, rulers of a world without mammals. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that this peaceful reign won't last forever. Somewhere unseen, history is already beginning to shift. You move forward feeling the terrain shift beneath your feet. The ground becomes softer, sponge-like, from centuries of leaf litter piling onto itself. Massive tree ferns arch overhead like nature's green umbrellas, their fronds gently swaying as the wind whispers through the forest. The deeper you go, the stranger this world feels. Not because of what's here, but because of what isn't. No squirrels darting through the branches. No rabbits scurrying through the underbrush. No foxes sneaking between the shadows. It's quiet in a way your modern brain isn't used to a world without mammals. This is one of New Zealand's most fascinating quirks. The land broke away from Gondwana before mammals ever had a chance to colonize. And so, evolution got creative. Here's your mainstream fact aside from a few species of bats. New Zealand's land was entirely mammal-free until humans arrived. In the absence of typical predators and grazers, birds stepped up and filled almost every niche you might expect mammals to hold elsewhere. You look around and suddenly this odd arrangement starts making more sense. The giant moa became the herbivorous grazers, New Zealand's answer to deer or antelope. Small birds like the now extinct New Zealand wrens hopped around the leaf litter like tiny feathered rodents. The kiwi, still around today, evolved to fill something like the role of a nocturnal insectivore, shuffling through the undergrowth on stout little legs, snuffling for bugs with its sensitive beak. Even the predators weren't mammals. Up above, still circling ominously, Haast's eagle rules the skies. But there were also large, predatory parrots. Yes, you heard that right, like the now extinct Nestor notabilis, which historians still argue may have preyed on insects, lizards, and possibly even small chicks left unattended. You continue walking along a narrow fern-lined trail, and you spot something peculiar. A cluster of towering cabbage trees, Cordyline australis, rises ahead like tropical sentinels. Their thick, spiky leaves wave stiffly in the breeze. These trees are another evolutionary puzzle, possibly developing tough, fibrous leaves, specifically to withstand the relentless nibbling of the moa. It's not just the plants that evolved in the absence of mammals, it's the entire ecosystem. Without hoofed animals to trample the forest floor, or burrowing rodents to churn the soil, New Zealand's undergrowth grew thick and tangled. The forests seem almost frozen in time, lush, pristine, and yet strangely fragile. You pause again, listening. There's a strange absence of background noise your modern ears crave. No buzzing mosquitoes. No buzzing cicadas. No constant hum of mammalian life. Just the occasional rustle of enormous feet and distant bird calls echoing through the mist. And then you catch sight of another moa family. This group includes one adult and several juveniles, gangly, awkward teenagers, still growing into their oversized legs and necks. The chicks wobble slightly as they walk, practicing the slow, deliberate gait their adult counterparts have long since mastered. Every now and then, one gives a short, soft grunt almost like a sigh. Here's your quirky tidbit. Researchers believe moa may have produced deep resonating vocalizations similar to low-frequency booming, heard in some modern ratites. Unlike a songbird's chirp, these sounds could travel long distances through the dense forests, helping mates locate each other across vast stretches of territory. Imagine a subwoofer humming gently across an entire valley. Now that's birdsong with bass. You smile, imagining what it might have sounded like to camp here at night, a deep, pulsing hum echoing through the trees as moa called to one another beneath the starlit sky. And yet, despite their size and numbers, there's an undeniable vulnerability to these birds. They're built for a world without enemies. No sharp claws. No defensive horns. Not even fast reflexes. Their only defense is their size, and for most of their history, that was enough. But standing here, surrounded by these feathered giants, you feel the tension building. You know what's coming. Evolution had gifted them size and stability, but it never prepared them for what would eventually arrive. The calm before the storm always feels the most peaceful, doesn't it? You take a few more steps, your boots crunching softly against twigs. The air grows cooler as you move into a shaded ravine, where massive kahikatea trees rise, like silent skyscrapers overhead. These were once among the tallest trees in New Zealand, ancient giants, standing shoulder to shoulder with the moa themselves. You spot a patch of bright orange fungi clinging to a rotting log. This is Citariagoni, sometimes called beach orange, an odd little fungus that survives symbiotically on certain trees. Like many things here, it evolved without mammals constantly tearing up the forest floor or competing for its niche. Even the fungi live in their own carefully balanced world. But fragile balances rarely last forever. You pause once more, hearing the familiar rush of wind overhead, a sound you'll become increasingly wary of as your journey continues. The Haast's eagle, patient and hungry, scans the open glades and clearings for any isolated moa chick that might have wandered too far from its parents' towering legs. The moa, blissfully unaware, continue their slow, methodical feeding. And for now, you walk among them, knowing you're witnessing the final golden age of these gentle giants. A moment suspended just before history takes its sharpest turn. The temperature rises ever so slightly. As you leave the cool shade of the ravine behind, you feel a new kind of energy in the air. It's not just the gentle rustling of leaves or the steady clumping of moa feet. It's something sharper, more alert, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. You glance upward. There it is again, the Haast's eagle. It's difficult to fully appreciate just how massive this bird is until you see it like this, framed against the pale morning sky. Its wings stretch wide, nearly 3 meters from tip to tip. That's as wide as a small car. Each beat of those wings sends brief gusts of air rippling across the forest canopy. And as its sharp yellow eyes scan the forest below, you're reminded, while the moa ruled the ground, the skies belonged to this apex predator. Here's your mainstream fact. Hieraetus murray, commonly known as Haast's eagle, was the largest eagle to ever exist, weighing up to 15 kilograms, around 33 pounds. It had massive talons as large as tiger claws, perfectly designed for taking down creatures far bigger than itself. In short, this bird hunted moa for a living. And not just chicks either. Full-grown adult moas, some standing over 10 feet tall, were on the menu. You hear the sudden hollow whoosh of wings as the eagle swoops lower, gliding silently between towering trees. Its head tilts slightly, gauging the small herd of moa grazing in the clearing ahead. You instinctively duck even though you're not its target. The bird isn't even slightly interested in you. You are for once grateful for your unappetizing modern self. The eagle circles, observing its prey with laser precision. It's searching for weaknesses: a chick that's wandered too far, a juvenile lagging behind, or an adult momentarily distracted while feeding. Suddenly, one young moa stumbles. That's all the opening the eagle needs. Without warning, it folds its massive wings and dives. The speed is breathtaking. You barely have time to register what's happening before the eagle slams into its target with devastating force, driving its razor-sharp talons deep into the bird's back. The young moa collapses with a dull thud, its legs kicking helplessly, as the eagle delivers one final crushing blow with its curved beak. The entire ambush lasts only a few seconds. You stand frozen, heart-pounding. You've just witnessed the brutal efficiency that made Haast's eagle the undisputed top predator of ancient New Zealand. But here's your quirky tidbit. Unlike most birds of prey, Haast's eagle evolved to hunt prey many times its own size. In most parts of the world, eagles catch rabbits or fish. Not here. Here the eagle was more like a flying lion. Some scientists even compare its hunting technique to that of big cats: ambush, pounce, subdue. With no large mammals to fill that role, evolution handed the job to a bird. The larger adult moa in the clearing barely react to the attack. They simply shuffle a few feet away, heads bobbing slightly, and continue feeding. For them, this is simply part of life. They've evolved in tandem with this danger. An adult moa's sheer size makes it a risky and less attractive target for even the Haast's eagle. But they're young well, not every chick lives to adulthood. You watch as the eagle, now feasting occasionally, glances upward, wary of potential scavengers. Though it rules the skies, even it must guard its kill. Smaller carrion birds already gather at the edges of the clearing, eyeing the remains greedily. And this brings us to one of the most debated questions in paleontology: did Haast's eagle ever pose a threat to early humans? The idea has sparked endless arguments. Some researchers believe these eagles were specialized moa hunters who would have ignored humans entirely. Others suggest that a human, especially a lone child, could very well have been viewed as suitable prey by a hungry eagle. After all, we're roughly the same size as a juvenile moa. Historians still argue whether Haast's eagle ever saw us as food or simply as an odd, inconvenient competitor. You shiver slightly at the thought. It's one thing to imagine lions or bears stalking humans, but a giant flying ambush predator, that's nightmare fuel with feathers. You take a few cautious steps backward, leaving the eagle to its meal. The forest seems quieter now, as if the other animals are paying respect to the deadly efficiency on display. Even the insects buzz more softly. The surviving moa resume their steady browsing heads, bobbing rhythmically as though nothing has happened. This strange balance of predator and prey continued for thousands of years, a stable, self-contained system where giant birds ruled both sky and earth. The moa grew large and slow because they could afford to. The Haast's eagle grew massive and aggressive because it had to. Together, they formed one of nature's oddest evolutionary partnerships. But even as you watch this ancient scene, you know the clock is ticking. Another type of predator is approaching one neither the moa nor the Haast's eagle have any defense against. You can almost hear the distant rhythm of paddles striking water far beyond the horizon. The forest shifts again as you walk. The towering trees thin out into patches of open shrubland where sunlight spills freely across tall grasses and scraggly bushes. This, too, is moa territory, though here the behavior of the birds changes subtly. You spot them even before you hear them, scattered herds of moa grazing in small groups, their long necks rising and dipping in a slow, unhurried rhythm. It's like watching a field full of awkward feathered giraffes, except with far less coordination. This is where you begin to notice something important. Not all moa behave the same. Depending on the species, the season, and the landscape they live out, very different lifestyles. Here's your mainstream fact. Scientists believe the various moa species divided up the landscape to avoid competition, much like how deer, elk, and moose coexist in different niches today. The larger South Island giant moa preferred wetter lowland forests, where tall foliage was plentiful. The heavy-footed eastern moa stuck to drier inland shrublands. The upland moa clung to alpine areas, toughing out harsher climates. Even within paradise, survival meant finding your own patch of ground. You watch one group from a distance, a small band of eastern moa. These are more compact than the towering forest dwellers, but still tall enough to make you feel oddly short. Their feeding style is different too. Instead of reaching high into the trees, they pluck at shrubs, grasses, and low branches with their beaks, clipping off mouthfuls like giant garden shears. The rhythm of their movement is hypnotic. Step, pluck, chew. Step, pluck, chew. Occasionally, one bird pauses to stretch its neck toward another, issuing a quiet low grunt that vibrates faintly in your chest. This is moa conversation, simple, rumbling sounds that carry through dense undergrowth. Scientists believe these deep vocalizations allowed moa to stay in contact across thick forests where visibility was limited. Now, here's a quirky fact for tonight. Despite their awkward appearance, moa may have been surprisingly mobile. Fossilized trackways show that these heavy birds could move briskly when needed, striding across large territories in search of food. Their broad feet acted like snowshoes, distributing weight across soft ground and preventing them from sinking into muddy soil. They may have been slow sprinters, but they were marathon walkers. As you follow one of the herds from a safe distance, you start to pick up on little behaviors that hint at a surprisingly complex social structure. The chicks stick close to their mothers, darting in and out of cover like fluffy wind-up toys. Juveniles gather together in loose, playful groups, occasionally chasing one another in slow-motion races through the grass. The adults maintain distance but stay loosely connected, always scanning their surroundings for danger, though in truth there are few threats here, aside from the ever-present sky. Suddenly, one adult lets out a sharp huff. Its neck stiffens and the rest of the group responds instantly, freezing like statues. You follow their gaze upward. Yes, there it is again, that familiar dark silhouette drifting high above. The Haast's eagle has returned, always watching, always patient. But this time, the eagle doesn't dive. The group is too tightly clustered, the adults alert. No vulnerable chick has strayed far enough to warrant the risk. After a few long, tense moments, the eagle banks to one side and glides away, leaving only the soft rustle of wind in its wake. The moa herd exhales and the rhythmic grazing resumes. You continue to follow as they wander, noticing how they browse across wide areas, never fully stripping any single patch of vegetation. This kind of roaming grazer behavior helped maintain the balance of the ecosystem for thousands of years. Without mammalian grazers, the moa essentially shaped New Zealand's plant life through selective pruning, and historians still argue about just how much of New Zealand's unique plant diversity, thick leaves, spiny branches, bizarre chemical defenses, came specifically from these browsing habits. Did moa drive these adaptations? Or were the plants already tough, forcing the moa to specialize? The debate lingers as all good scientific mysteries do. You step carefully around a shallow depression, a well-worn path pressed into the ground by countless moa feet. Over generations, they've carved out these quiet highways across the landscape, creating invisible roadmaps that weave through forests, grasslands, and hills. Some of these ancient pathways are still visible today, traced by paleontologists studying their long-lost habits. The day wears on, and you begin to appreciate just how much ground these birds cover. They're not aimless wanderers. Their movements follow the seasons, the flowering cycles of plants, the availability of fresh water. In dry years, they journey long distances to reach reliable feeding grounds. In wetter seasons, they stay closer to home, raising chicks and forming small herds like the one you're shadowing now. And while they may seem passive at first glance, make no mistake, these birds aren't helpless. If cornered or threatened, even a mid-sized moa could lash out with powerful kicks that could shatter bone. Their heavy claws, while blunt, delivered enough force to discourage most predators. You remind yourself once again not to get too close. Peaceful doesn't mean harmless. As dusk begins to settle, you find a comfortable spot beneath a tall totara tree and watch as the herd beds down for the night. The chicks huddle beneath the sheltering legs of their mothers. The adults lower themselves to the ground, folding those long, elegant necks into gentle coils that rest against their feathered backs. The forest hums softly around you, a few nocturnal insects, distant calls of unseen birds, the quiet breathing of resting moa. Even the wind seems to hush as if respecting the nightfall. Tomorrow, the herds will rise again, continue their endless grazing, and repeat the same slow rhythm that has guided them for millions of years. For now, the giant birds sleep peacefully. But soon, very soon, this calm world will change forever. The first light of dawn spills across the treetops, and with it, a low rumble fills the air, a sound so deep it seems to vibrate in your chest rather than your ears. The moa are awake. You watch as a group of South Island giant moa rises from their resting spots, unfolding those impossibly long necks in fluid, elegant arcs. Nearby, the younger moa shuffle around, some awkwardly shaking out their feathers like ungainly teenagers, stretching after a long sleep. It's easy to forget just how absurdly tall these creatures are until you see them fully upright again. For a moment, they stand like feathered sentinels beneath the towering podocarps. Then, one of them lets out a booming call, a deep resonating hum that echoes through the forest like some distant foghorn. Here's your mainstream fact for today. While no one alive has heard a moa's voice, scientists believe they likely communicated through low-frequency vocalizations that could travel for miles, much like modern cassowaries and emus do today. In a dense, sight-limited environment like New Zealand's forests, sound was often their best way of finding each other. And right now, you're getting a front row seat to what appears to be courtship season. The males begin their performances, if you can call them that. One steps into a small clearing, straightens its neck to its full height, and starts to sway. Slowly at first, then with increasing rhythm, like an awkward dancer unsure if anyone is watching. Another joins in, swinging his head side to side, producing a series of rhythmic vibrating calls. The entire forest seems to pulse with their strange music. You almost want to chuckle. For such massive creatures, their mating displays are surprisingly clumsy. And here comes your quirky tidbit. Some paleontologists suggest that these neck-swaying courtship dances may have included full-body sways, stamping feet, and even light-pecking displays. Essentially the Moa version of "Are you impressed yet?" No elaborate feathers or fancy colors, just good old-fashioned awkward wiggling and deep booming sounds. You notice the females nearby standing quietly but watching with detached interest. They don't seem easily impressed. One of the males sways particularly enthusiastically, adding a kind of circular hop to his performance. She responds by taking a single slow step away. Tough crowd. But that's how it goes in the world of Moa romance. The males put on their best and slightly ridiculous shows, while the females carefully size up potential partners. Strength, stamina, and boys might signal good genetics, but ultimately the females make the call. This selection process was crucial. For a species that invested so much in raising a limited number of young mating with a strong partner, increased the odds of successful offspring. Remember, laying and protecting Moa eggs was a high-risk game. As you watch this slow-motion dance-off unfold, you can't help but appreciate how much energy these creatures pour into the simple act of reproduction. No songs, no glittering plumage, just vibrations, neck sways, and raw persistence. Historians still argue whether these behaviors were primarily about mating or territory defense, or maybe a bit of both. Was the booming a way to attract females, warn off rivals, or simply broadcast, "Hey, I'm here and I'm massive"? The forest doesn't offer easy answers. You step carefully around the edge of the clearing, giving the performers plenty of space. The ground beneath you is littered with broken fern fronds and the occasional polished stone. This spot, you realize, has likely served as a Moa gathering ground for countless generations. Their ancestors may have performed this same slow, swaying ritual on this very patch of earth for thousands of years. And as funny as it looks, there's something oddly beautiful about it. The simplicity, the repetition, the timeless rhythm of life in a world untouched by humans for now. But your mind can't help drifting ahead. You know what's coming. Soon, new eyes will arrive in these forests, eyes that measure these giant birds not with awe, but with hunger. The quiet courtship dances will give way to something much more dangerous. You exhale softly, savoring this last glimpse of Moa life as it's meant to be peaceful, deliberate, oddly graceful. And then, as if sensing your thoughts, one of the males emits one final drawn-out boom that rolls through the forest like distant thunder. His rivals fall silent. The females shift slightly, considering their options. For now, life continues, but the ripples of history are getting closer. The forest is alive with sound this morning, though not the kind you're used to. As you continue your quiet trek, your ears tune to the deep rumble of Moa calls, the occasional rustle of giant bodies moving through brush, and the soft whisper of leaves swaying high above. And then you see it, nestled in a shallow depression, barely disguised by a few half-hearted tufts of grass, sits an egg. Not just any egg. This thing is massive, about the size of a soccer ball, maybe bigger. Its creamy pale shell gleams faintly under the dappled morning light, its surface delicately speckled. You crouch instinctively, heart racing slightly, careful not to make sudden movements. You're looking at one of the most fragile and important objects in all of ancient New Zealand, a moa egg. Here's your mainstream fact. Moa laid some of the largest bird eggs in the world. The biggest species, like the South Island giant moa, laid eggs weighing up to 4.5 kilograms, roughly the weight of a bowling ball. And yet, despite their size, these eggs were incredibly delicate, with shells thinner than you'd expect for something housing a bird that could eventually grow taller than an NBA player. You glance around, half expecting an angry moa parent to come crashing through the trees. But the nest seems abandoned for now. Moa, like many ground-nesting birds, didn't spend every waking moment sitting on their eggs. Instead, they relied on camouflage, patience, and sheer luck to keep their precious offspring safe. Of course, this strategy worked wonderfully until something new entered the ecosystem. But we're not quite there yet. You step back, careful not to leave any sign you've been here. The egg remains untouched, a quiet symbol of life's precarious gamble. Nearby, another family of moa grazes, including a mother and several fuzzy chicks. The little ones waddle after her on wobbly legs, their downy feathers catching glints of sunlight. Their small, round bodies make them look more like oversized ducklings than prehistoric giants in training. Here's your quirky tidbit. Baby moa grew remarkably fast. Some species may have reached adult size in as little as 4 or 5 years, a necessity, considering how vulnerable they were in their early months. The faster you outgrow your predator's appetite, the better your odds of survival. And speaking of predators, you can feel that familiar tension in the air again. The Haast's eagle hasn't left. You look skyward and spot its silhouette once more, gliding effortlessly above the trees like a living shadow. The eagle knows what you know. These chicks are easy pickings if left unguarded. One particularly bold chick strays a little too far from its mother, pecking curiously at a cluster of bright orange fungi. The mother moa responds instantly, lowering her head and issuing a deep, throaty grunt that vibrates through the air. The chick freezes, then quickly scrambles back toward the safety of towering legs. You can't help but admire how tightly choreographed this ancient dance is. Giant birds balancing parental instincts, the constant threat from above, and the endless need to graze. As you move along a narrow ridge, you stumble across a curious pile of broken eggshells. Some pieces have been pecked open neatly. Others appear shattered. It's a reminder that not every egg hatches successfully. Some may have been abandoned, others predated, and others simply victims of misfortune. Historians still argue over exactly how many moa chicks ever made it to adulthood. Was it 1 in 5, 1 in 10? The numbers shift, depending on which paleontologist you ask. But the general consensus is clear. Surviving your first few years as a moa chick was no small feat. Suddenly, the forest explodes into motion ahead of you. A Haast's eagle dives not toward an adult this time, but toward another vulnerable chick, several yards away from its family. The mother lunges forward in a burst of surprising speed, spreading her wings and kicking upward with powerful legs. The eagle aborts its dive at the last moment, sweeping skyward in frustration. The chick lives another day. You exhale slowly, heart pounding once again. Even after days in this strange world, the sheer scale of life and death drama playing out around you never fails to stir something primal. You continue walking, passing several more nests tucked carefully beneath low shrubs and fallen branches. The placement isn't random. Moa seemed to favor nesting near cover where eggs were slightly less visible to sharp-eyed predators. But ultimately, no nest was ever truly safe. And now, for a sobering reality check. As dangerous as Haast's eagle was, it wasn't the greatest threat these eggs would eventually face. That honor would belong to us. When humans finally arrived on these shores, they discovered these giant, easy-to-hunt birds, and more crucially, these enormous, highly edible eggs. A single moa egg could feed several people at once, making them an irresistible target for early settlers. But not yet. That chapter is still on the horizon. For now, as the sun dips lower and long shadows creep across the forest floor, the moa settle once again. Mothers stand watch over their nests. Chicks gather beneath feathered bellies for warmth. Even the Haast's eagle drifts away toward distant cliffs to roost. Night returns, wrapping this fragile world in a thin veil of peace. For a while longer, the moa hold their ground. The next morning greets you with a cool mist, clinging to the hills, giving the forest a dreamlike glow. As you step quietly among the ferns and soft moss, you notice something curious, not about the moa themselves, this time, but about the plants around you. It's easy to forget that these giants weren't the only ones shaped by millions of years of isolation. The plants of New Zealand too evolved alongside the moa, sometimes because of them. And as you're about to discover this relationship runs deep, you stop by a stand of broadleaf shrubs with thick rubbery leaves. The edges are jagged, almost like tiny saw blades. Their surface feels waxy beneath your fingertips. This is not random plant design, it's the result of eons of chemical and physical warfare against persistent grazers. Here's your mainstream fact: many New Zealand plant species develop tough fibrous leaves, specifically to deter browsing from moa. Without mammalian grazers, plants here evolved to defend against tall, hungry beaks instead of gnawing teeth. Evolution had rewritten the rulebook to suit its unique players. You spot a juvenile moa stretching its neck to reach these shrubs, snipping leaves effortlessly despite their defenses. It seems almost unfair the plant's evolutionary arms race, producing all those leathery leaves only for a giant bird to chomp through them like wet paper. But that's the dynamic they lived with for millions of years, a constant tug-of-war between eater and eaten. And then you notice something even stranger: several smaller plants nearby are growing awkwardly, their trunks twisted into strange, zigzag patterns. It almost looks like someone sculpted them into unnatural shapes. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some researchers believe these divaricate growth habit branches, spreading into tangled chaotic shapes, may have evolved as another defense against moa. The zigzag structure makes it difficult for a tall bird with a long beak to easily strip leaves from the plant's center. Instead, the birds are forced to nibble at the edges, giving the plant a fighting chance to regenerate. You run your fingers along one of these tangled branches, imagining a time when hundreds of moa grazed these very shrubs, daily shaping the forest with every bite. But it wasn't just plants that adapted. You spot a patch of tall speargrass nearby, known to Maori as taramea. Its sharp, rigid leaves jutting like green daggers from the earth. Some scientists suggest that these plants also evolved to discourage constant nibbling from moa beaks. In modern times, the resin from these same speargrasses was collected by Maori for its sweet scent, a small echo of the ancient plant-bird relationship. You continue along a narrow, well-worn path, the kind worn down by generations of heavy Moa feet, walking the same routes between feeding grounds, water sources, and nesting sites. These natural highways crisscross the landscape for thousands of years, their routes still faintly visible even today. Long after the birds themselves vanished, historians still argue whether these ancient trails helped shape where later Maori footpaths would form following the same convenient roads laid down by giant birds long before human arrival. Your walk leads you to a quiet clearing beside a stream. The water sparkles in the sunlight and you spot a group of moa drinking leisurely from the shallows. Their movements are slow. Careful, one long-legged bird steps into the stream and lowers its head for a drink, droplets falling from its beak like tiny diamonds. The scene feels timeless, like you've stepped into an untouched moment that could have played out the same way 5,000 years ago or 50,000. But this world balanced so delicately on the back of coevolution was never invincible. You sit beneath the towering limbs of a kahikatea tree and watch the herd graze. The peaceful dynamic between moa and plant life worked beautifully in this isolated world, but it depended on one thing: stability. No new predators. No sudden changes. Which of course is exactly what was coming. As you rest, you can almost feel it creeping closer, a faint pulse in history's timeline. The world these moa ruled so completely was on borrowed time. Even now, far beyond the ocean's horizon, canoes are slicing through distant waves. Humans are drawing near. But tonight, at least, the moa drink from their stream. Their feet stirring the silt, their towering forms swaying gently in the breeze, completely unaware that their reign as the giants of New Zealand is about to face its greatest test. The sky is darker than usual today. The clouds hang low and heavy as if the forest itself is sensing a change. You continue your walk, but your focus shifts from the giant birds around you to something approaching just beyond the horizon of time. Because now, after millions of years of peaceful rule, new visitors are arriving. You hear the soft, rhythmic splash of paddles, cutting through water, steady practice, patient. The first Polynesian settlers, soon to be known as the Maori, are landing their waka-long ocean-faring canoes onto the shores of this strange new land. Here's your mainstream fact: humans first arrived in New Zealand roughly 700 to 800 years ago, making it one of the last major landmasses on Earth to be settled. For countless generations, these islands remained untouched by human hands. But that isolation was ending. You stand quietly on the edge of the tree line as the first canoes glide onto the beaches. Dozens of men, women, and children step out their eyes, scanning this lush, green paradise. They bring with them sharp stone tools, fire dogs, and rats, all uninvited passengers that will soon leave their own mark on this fragile world. For the Maori, New Zealand Aotearoa must have seemed like an unimaginable bounty. Forests teeming with birds, rivers flowing with fish, fertile soil for planting. But nothing captured their attention more than the giant, fearless moa wandering everywhere. Imagine it for a moment: you step onto a new continent, and towering birds as tall as a house simply stroll past, showing little to no fear of your presence. For people skilled in hunting and survival, the opportunity was almost too perfect. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Maori oral traditions describe the moa as so unfamiliar that they were initially thought to be some kind of supernatural creature. In some stories, the birds were seen as gifts from the gods awaiting discovery. Others suggest that the first hunters may have hesitated, unsure whether they were even allowed to kill such bizarre creatures. Of course, that hesitation didn't last long. You watch as one of the Maori hunters lifts a spear examining the great bird before him. The moa glances over but makes no move to run. After all, it's never encountered a threat like this before. No natural instinct warns it of what humans are capable of. The first strike lands. At first, hunting moa would have seemed almost laughably easy. They didn't bolt at the sight of humans. They didn't hide or flee. A skilled team with simple weapons could take down an adult moa with relative ease. The birds built for browsing and walking were never designed to face fast, coordinated hunters. And soon, entire communities began organizing large-scale hunts. You walk now alongside these first expeditions. Small groups of hunters moving silently through the bush, using dogs to flush out moa from dense cover, driving them into traps or ambush points. Large fires may have been used to herd entire groups toward waiting spears. Here's where historians still argue, were these early hunts carefully managed, or was it a free-for-all? Some scholars believe the Maori may have initially tried to harvest the moa sustainably, taking only what was needed. Others argue that the birds' sheer abundance combined with their naivety led to rapid overhunting from the very start. Either way, the result was the same. The moa populations, stable for millions of years, suddenly faced pressure they couldn't adapt to. Adult birds were killed for meat hides and bones. Eggs were harvested for food. Nesting sites were raided. Chicks were taken before they could grow. Generation after generation was removed faster than they could be replaced. And it wasn't just humans. You notice small shadows moving through the undergrowth. Polynesian rats, or kiore, brought unknowingly aboard those first canoes. These tiny invaders became prolific egg thieves, sneaking into nests and devouring fragile moa eggs. Even the dogs brought by Maori likely hunted chicks. The moa, for all their size and strength, were utterly defenseless against this new wave of pressures. You stop at a quiet clearing that just days ago was filled with the deep booms of mating calls. It's empty now. The plants still stand, the wind still sighs through the trees. But the moa that once grazed here have either fled or fallen. In the grand timeline of Earth, the collapse came swiftly, likely within just a few hundred years of human arrival. From millions to none in the blink of an evolutionary eye. For now though, as you stand watching those early hunters work their way through the dense forests, the moa are still here, still numerous, still towering, still unaware of just how little time they have left. The balance is broken. The countdown has begun. You continue your slow walk through the changing forest, but now something feels different. Not just the silence, not just the occasional broken feathers scattered in the undergrowth, it's the heaviness in the air. As if the land itself senses what's happening. The great hunt is fully underway. The Maori, who arrived wide-eyed and curious, now master the land's rhythms. They know where the moa sleep, where they feed, where they nest. The early awkwardness is gone. What you witness now is organized, efficient, methodical. You crouch behind a fallen log as a hunting party moves past. The men are silent, each armed with carefully shaped wooden clubs, spears tipped with obsidian or sharpened bone. A group of dogs trots ahead, their noses low, tracking the heavy scent of the moa. Here's your mainstream fact: archaeological sites across New Zealand reveal numerous moa hunting camps, places where bones were butchered, fires built, and the remains of countless birds piled into middens. Some sites contain thousands of bones, showing how large and frequent these hunts became. The hunters work together, moving with confidence through the dense foliage. Some fawn out, circling around a small herd they've been tracking since dawn. You hear one let out a sharp whistle, an agreed-upon signal, and the group begins tightening the noose. The moa, for all their size, don't bolt like deer. They shift nervously, a few stepping away from the edges of the encroaching humans. The adults lower their heads, swaying those long necks warily. The chicks huddle close to their mother's legs. And then, with a burst of energy, the hunters strike. Snares tighten. Spears fly. The dogs dart in, barking sharply as they harass the panicking birds. A few moa attempt to run, their heavy legs pounding the earth in slow, thundering strides. But they're quickly outmaneuvered. The hunting party is faster, more coordinated, more practiced. In minutes, the clearing falls silent again, except for the sounds of heavy breathing, the soft calls of relieved hunters, and the squawking of frightened birds that manage to escape into the forest. The kill is brutal but efficient. You watch as the hunters get to work. The butchering begins almost immediately. Massive drumstick-like legs are severed first, each one offering enough meat to feed a family for days. The hides are carefully peeled, destined to become cloaks or coverings. The strong, hollow leg bones will be fashioned into tools, weapons, and ornaments. The sinews stripped from tendons will make excellent binding material. Here's your quirky tidbit. Moa bones, being both lightweight and strong, were used to craft everything from fishing hooks to spear tips to musical instruments. In some cases, hollow bones were even turned into flutes capable of producing eerie whistling tones, perhaps imitating the very birds they came from. Nothing goes to waste. You step back quietly observing. The forest absorbs the activity like it always does, but each hunt leaves fewer moa behind. With every successful kill, the population thins just a little more. The herds, once so widespread, become harder to find. The hunters must travel farther each season, pressing deeper into the remaining pockets of wilderness. Historians still argue over just how quickly the population collapsed. Was it a gradual, century-long decline? Or was the extinction shockingly fast, just a few generations of intense hunting? Some studies suggest many moa species may have vanished within 100 to 200 years after human arrival. It's a debate that continues to stir among paleontologists and archaeologists to this day. You follow one group back to their camp, an area bustling with life. Fires crackle as massive cuts of moa meat roast over open flames. Children run between the cooking pits, playing with carved moa bone toys, while elders prepare hides and bones for crafting. The scene is both vibrant and sobering, a community thriving on the bounty of an ecosystem that cannot sustain this pace for long. You catch the aroma of roasting meat, thick, rich, almost sweet. The sheer amount of protein provided by one giant bird allowed early communities to grow rapidly, expanding their villages and fueling the development of complex social structures, art, and oral histories. And here's where it becomes painfully ironic. The very success of these early hunters sealed the fate of the moa. The birds that had ruled New Zealand for millions of years were no match for this sudden wave of technological skill, cooperation, and hunger. You wander a little farther out, away from the bustling camp, and find a silent, empty clearing where the plants still grow but no moa graze. The absence is becoming louder than their presence ever was. And far above, unnoticed by the busy humans, the Haast's eagle circles lower these days, searching, waiting, and sensing that its own time is slipping away. The giant birds have not yet vanished entirely, but now, for the first time in their long reign, they are the hunted. You wake early the next morning following the now familiar scent of smoke and roasted meat, lingering in the humid forest air. The hunting camps are larger now, more permanent, where once small mobile groups moved quietly through the woods. You now see full communities, complete with woven shelters, neatly stacked firewood, and carefully laid out food stores. The moa have become central, not just to survival, but to culture. You sit near one of the fire pits, observing a group of Maori elders carefully preparing moa meat. Thick slabs are laid out on white heated stones. The flesh sizzles, releasing an aroma that makes your stomach grumble even across centuries. Large communal meals are being prepared. More than just sustenance, these are feasts. Here's your mainstream fact: moa meat wasn't simply eaten fresh. The Maori developed sophisticated methods of preservation, including earth ovens called hang, where meat was slow-cooked underground with hot stones, then stored for later use. In some cases, smoked and dried moa meat could be preserved for months. And while the moa were highly prized for their meat, every part of the bird was used. You watch a craftsman expertly split open one of the enormous leg bones. The marrow is scooped out and set aside, a rich, fatty treat. The bone itself is cleaned and polished. With practiced hands, he begins carving it into a flute, humming softly to himself as he works. Here's your quirky tidbit: bone flutes made from moa remains have been recovered from archaeological sites across New Zealand. When played, they produced haunting, high-pitched tones, perhaps even mimicking bird calls. Some researchers speculate these flutes may have been used during hunting expeditions, ceremonies, or storytelling sessions, their eerie sounds echoing through the forests where moa once roamed. The children gather around wide-eyed as an elder begins reciting stories by firelight. You listen carefully. The tales blend fact and myth, describing the great birds of the land, their towering size, and the daring hunters who brought them down. In some stories, the moa are almost godlike spirits of the forest, beings of power and mystery. In others, they're simply described as massive meals, sent by the gods to sustain the people. The line between history and legend blurs easily in these fireside retellings. You catch snippets of dialogue. When the first hunters arrived, the birds stood still, unafraid. The great ones fed us well, but vanished like smoke from a dying fire. We honor their bones in our tools, their flesh in our feasts, their spirit in our songs. The moa weren't merely prey, they became embedded into the identity of early Maori culture. But as you listen, you notice something else creeping into these stories: a sense of loss. Even here, even now, as the feasts continue, people are beginning to notice that the great birds grow scarcer with each season. One elder gestures toward the darkened forest and says softly, "We must walk farther now to find the tall ones. Soon they may be gone." Historians still argue whether these communities fully realized how rapidly the moa were disappearing. Some suggest that resource management systems may have been attempted, limiting hunting areas, rotating foraging grounds, but came too late to reverse the decline. Others argue that the moa simply couldn't keep up with the combined pressure of hunting, habitat disturbance, and introduced predators. You rise and move deeper into the forest, where once familiar herds of moa are now scattered and sparse. You spot a single pair, an adult and its near-grown chick, moving quietly through a sun-dappled glade. They pause, heads high, long necks, swinging gently as they nibble at tough, wiry shrubs. It's a rare sight now. Even the plants seem to sense the shift. With fewer grazers clipping them back, certain shrubs grow taller, spreading into territories they once shared with moa. The balance that shaped these ecosystems for millions of years begins to unravel. And yet, in this quiet moment, the moa remain dignified. There's no fear written on their narrow faces, no understanding of their shrinking numbers. They simply exist as they always have, moving, feeding, caring for their young. Far above, the Haast's eagle still soars, but its hunting grounds grow emptier with each passing year. Fewer moa chicks mean fewer meals. The mighty predator that once dominated the skies is slowly being starved by the disappearance of its only prey. You realize you're witnessing not just the extinction of one species, but the unraveling of an entire food web. And yet, for this moment under the warm afternoon sun, the moa move gracefully through their vanishing world, silent kings, unaware that their reign is nearly done. The sun rises on a forest that feels thinner. You walk for hours and see no moa. The booming calls that once vibrated through the trees are silent now. You don't even need to step carefully anymore. The well-worn tracks you once followed have started to fade, reclaimed by creeping plants and falling leaves. The great herds are gone. But even as the birds vanish, the land is already beginning to change in subtle, permanent ways. You pause beneath a towering totara tree. Around its base, young saplings fight for space. Among thick mats of shrubs and undergrowth, without moa to strip away leaves and trample smaller plants, the forest is growing denser. The air feels heavier, darker. Where once there were open patches grazed by browsing giants, now there's a green wall of tangled stems and twisted branches. Here's your mainstream fact. Many of New Zealand's plants co-evolved with moa browsing pressure. Their growth patterns leave toughness, and defensive structures were shaped by millions of years of being snipped and nibbled at by hungry beaks. With the moa gone, those selective pressures vanished almost overnight, allowing some plant species to grow unchecked. You step through a particularly dense thicket of debarricating shrubs, the zigzag, wiry plants that once frustrated moa feeders. Now, without tall birds, stripping their branches, they grow into dense, almost impenetrable thickets, creating new kinds of forest microhabitats. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some modern ecologists describe New Zealand's forests today as overgrown. Without moa acting as natural gardeners, many plant communities have grown tangled and chaotic, resulting in less sunlight reaching the forest floor, and a whole cascade of changes in insect populations, ground cover plants, and seed dispersal. It's not just the plants that feel the absence. The entire ecosystem seems slightly off. The silence is no longer peaceful, it's hollow. You continue along an old hunting trail long abandoned now. Scattered fragments of broken moa bones still rest beneath thin layers of soil. You gently nudge one loose with your boot. A hollow femur polished smooth by time. It feels light for its size, a ghost of the towering creature it once belonged to. Nearby, you find an old midden, a refuse heap where countless generations once deposited the remains of moa feasts. You see shattered eggshells, butchered leg bones, and charred cooking stones. What was once a vibrant, busy hunting camp is now completely silent, reclaimed by vines and moss. Historians still argue whether these early hunters fully understood the consequences of their actions. Some oral traditions hint at regret. Others suggest that new legends and spiritual beliefs arose to explain the sudden disappearance of the moa, as if the birds had chosen to leave rather than face extermination. You step farther into a clearing where massive tree trunks rise like ancient columns. Without moa grazing at the lower branches, the canopy is thicker now, shading the ground. Saplings that once struggled to survive under the pruning of beaks now thrive. And still you search for any sign of the great birds. At last you spot movement ahead, a lone moa, perhaps one of the very last. It moves cautiously through the dense understory, its tall neck swaying side to side. There's no herd, no mate, no chicks following at its feet. Just one solitary bird wandering through the forest it no longer shapes. You hold your breath watching it move quietly through the ferns. There's something heartbreaking about its isolation. The forest may be fuller, but the emptiness feels louder than ever. Even the Haast's eagle above seems defeated now. Its great shadow passes once, twice, then glides away in search of prey that no longer exists in numbers large enough to sustain it. The collapse of one species ripples outward, taking entire relationships with it. You turn to leave, but not before glancing one last time at the solitary moa as it vanishes into the green shadows. Its quiet footsteps echo through the forest, fading quickly into the heavy silence. The reign of the moa has nearly ended, but the legacy of their long rule and their sudden disappearance will echo through the land for centuries to come. You wake again to the calls of birds, but not the booming bass notes of the moa. The forest is now ruled by smaller voices, twee bellbirds and tiny warblers, flitting through the dense canopy. The giants are gone, but one final predator still circles the empty skies, refusing to fade quietly. The Haast's eagle. You watch it ride the morning currents, scanning the ground below. Its great wings stretch wide, casting a shadow over the trees like a passing cloud. It searches with sharp yellow eyes, but there's nothing left for it to hunt. No herds, no wandering juveniles, just dense vegetations, tangled shrubs, and a few scattered insects and lizards far beneath its notice. Here's your mainstream fact: Haast's eagle, Hieratus murray, evolved specifically to hunt large prey, primarily the moa. For thousands of years, its survival was tied completely to the abundance of these enormous birds. Once the moa disappeared, the eagle's fate was sealed as well. The giant eagle drifts lower as if hoping for a miracle. You feel a pang of something oddly close to sympathy, like watching a lion pacing an empty savanna or a polar bear stranded on shrinking ice. This was a master of its world, now reduced to a starving shadow. You move quietly, following its flight along a high ridge where winds whip through the exposed branches. Occasionally, the eagle glances downward, tilting its head as if daring anything to stir. But nothing does. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some researchers have speculated whether the Haast's eagle may have occasionally targeted early humans as its moa prey declined. A child or lone adult wandering too far from camp might have been seen as an acceptable substitute for a missing juvenile moa. While no direct evidence confirms this, it remains one of New Zealand's eeriest open debates. Historians still argue whether Haast's eagle adapted briefly feeding on smaller prey or scavenging from Maori camps. But for a bird designed to strike giants, such adjustments offered only a temporary reprieve. Its talons, sharp and powerful as tiger claws, were overbuilt for smaller game. Its immense body required large, high-protein meals. The shrinking ecosystem could no longer provide. You step carefully along a narrow outcrop where the skeleton of a once mighty kahikatea tree lies toppled and rotting. Around it, the young forest thickens, eager to reclaim the light and space. And above you, the Haast's eagle circles once more. There's something hauntingly majestic about its persistence. Even in decline, it flies with grace, powerful wing beats cutting through the crisp air. The evolutionary masterpiece that once ruled these skies is performing its final silent patrol. But you both know there's nothing left to find. Eventually, the eagle drifts off toward distant cliffs. You watch it disappear behind a ridge of jagged mountains, the last fortress for a vanishing king. And here too, the forest is shifting without the moa. Certain trees no longer get their seeds dispersed by passing grazers. Some shrubs grow unchecked, while others dwindle, without the cycles of pruning and fertilization the moa once provided. The ecosystem, once perfectly balanced through strange partnerships between plants, giant birds and predators, now teeters in a kind of quiet imbalance. Even the Maori begin to notice the absence. Stories shift, myths grow. The moa become creatures of the past giants, their ancestors hunted, but that no one living has seen. You reach a sheltered valley where a few ancient middens remain, layers of bone fragments, broken tools, and charred earth buried beneath moss and soil. Archaeologists will one day dig here, piecing together this rapid extinction from the scattered remains left behind. It's sobering how quickly it all unraveled, from the moment humans arrived to the last moa's quiet disappearance. Perhaps just 2 or 3 centuries passed, a blink in the scale of geological time. You pause and take one final look over the darkened canopy. The calls of small birds still fill the air, but the great humming booms of the moa are gone. The mighty Haast's eagle, like its prey, will not last much longer. And so the ancient balance finally collapses. The land breathes differently now, overgrown, crowded, and strangely quiet without its feathered giants. The forest continues to grow thicker as you push forward. Without the moa to clear trails, the undergrowth has filled every gap. Shrubs compete for space. Beneath towering podocarps, vines coil around tree trunks and fallen logs lie where they fell, slowly sinking into the moss. But humans haven't vanished, quite the opposite. You emerge from the trees into a wide clearing, not made by moa but by fire. Blackened stumps rise like broken teeth from the charred earth. A thin haze of smoke still hangs in the air. The Maori are reshaping the land, clearing forests to make way for Kumara gardens, constructing fortified pa villages on ridges, and expanding their communities across the islands. Here's your mainstream fact: the arrival of humans didn't just affect animals, it reshaped entire ecosystems. Maori used controlled burns to clear land for cultivation, further reducing the moa's remaining habitat. The birds had already been hunted into scattered pockets. Now, even those sanctuaries were shrinking. You walk through the smoking remains of this freshly cleared ground. Small groups work at the edges, planting crops and cutting timber. Their survival no longer depends on giant birds but on agriculture, fishing, and new strategies adapted to a world they've permanently changed. Still, you overhear scraps of conversation, brief, almost casual mentions of the moa, the great birds we used to hunt, the feasts our grandparents remember. The memory of the moa lingers like a shadow, still recent enough to feel personal, but already slipping toward myth. You move on, leaving the scorched earth behind, and enter one of the few remaining patches of undisturbed forest. It's quiet, too quiet. The familiar rustle of moa feet, the low hum of their calls gone. You spot another midden deep within the trees. This one is older, its contents slowly being swallowed by the forest floor. As you brush aside a thin layer of leaves, you find it a massive moa eggshell fragment. Its delicate curve cracked, but still surprisingly intact. You turn it gently in your hands, feeling its fragile weight, a ghost of a vanished world. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some fragments of moa eggshells were occasionally repurposed as containers, or even as pigments, when ground into fine powder and mixed with natural dyes for early Maori art, even as the birds vanished, their remains continued to serve human life in small, unexpected ways. You rise and continue deeper into the hills, where you find remnants of another kind legends. Carved into wooden posts, etched into stone, and whispered around fires, the moa remain alive in stories. They are no longer just food or resource. They have become Patupayarehe, Taniwa, or spirits of the land in some traditions. Some tales describe giant birds that fled deep into remote valleys, hiding from hunters and fires waiting to return. Others speak of monstrous birds far larger than any moa exaggerations passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether some of these stories reflect real sightings of the last surviving individuals, or if they became symbolic a way for future generations to explain what had been lost. You pause at a high vantage point overlooking a wide valley. Once this basin would have been filled with grazing moa, their long necks swaying in rhythm as they browse the tallest shrubs. Now it's eerily still. Dense growth spreads unchecked. The birds are absent, but their absence is shaping the land just as much as their presence once did. The loss of the moa triggered what ecologists call a trophic cascade, when the removal of one key species ripples across an entire ecosystem. Plants that depended on moa for seed dispersal struggle. Others once kept trimmed overgrow. The disappearance of moa chicks starved the Haast's eagle, driving it to extinction. Even insect populations shifted as the balance unraveled. You look up. The skies are emptier now. The great shadow of the Haast's eagle no longer circles. A few small birds flit overhead, chirping brightly in the afternoon sun. They are the survivors, the species able to adapt to this new, tighter, smaller world. And as you stand there, you realize how short the moa's extinction really was. In less than 300 years, a creature that had ruled uncontested for millions vanished entirely. So sudden, so permanent. Yet their footprints remain etched into the land in trails, in plant adaptations, in ancient stories still whispered. You take one last breath of the cool mountain air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and moss. The giants are gone, but the land still remembers. The centuries turn and you find yourself stepping out of the forest and into a much different world. The Europeans have arrived. Tall-masted ships appear on the coasts, their wooden hulls creaking as sailors drop anchor and step onto these distant shores. New faces, new tools, new languages, all arriving with their own ideas of what might be found here. You walk alongside early explorers and settlers as they move inland, cutting new paths through the dense forests, their boots trampling the narrow remnants of old moa trails. But unlike the Maori before them, these newcomers never witnessed the towering birds in life. They arrived too late, yet their curiosity is immediate. Here's your mainstream fact. When European settlers arrived in New Zealand during the late 18th century, they found no living moa. The birds had likely been extinct for over 400 years. But what they did find puzzled them greatly. Enormous bones lying scattered across ancient middens and buried beneath layers of earth. You watch as a group of European naturalists gather around a freshly excavated skeleton. They marvel at the enormous leg bones, the towering vertebrae, the giant eggshell fragments. Some estimate that the creature must have been a type of ostrich. Others speculate wildly about dragons, giant emus, or birds long since forgotten by science. And here's your quirky tidbit. In the early 1800s, when moa bones were first sent back to Europe, some scientists initially dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes. Giant birds in New Zealand Surely someone was exaggerating. But as more and more bones arrived, many of them remarkably intact, the scientific community could no longer deny what stood before them. Historians still argue exactly when the last moa died. Some suggest that isolated pockets may have survived longer than we once thought, perhaps, hiding in remote valleys or mountain forests as late as the 15th century. Stories told to early European explorers spoke of enormous birds still lurking in the wilderness, fueling the mystery. You follow a group of eager European settlers trekking deep into Fiordland, following rumors passed down through Maori oral tradition. There are still giant birds, some whispered hiding where no one dares go. But the search parties return empty-handed. The forests remain silent. The giants, if any, survived into human memory, left no living trace. The rumors persist for decades. Every once in a while, someone claims to hear distant booming calls or finds massive footprints pressed into the mud. Newspapers publish wild accounts. Expeditions are mounted, but nothing concrete ever appears. You step into a 19th century museum hall. Here, towering moa skeletons now stand assembled for curious eyes. The reconstructed giants loom over polished wood floors, surrounded by glass display cases filled with stone tools, carved bone flutes, and haunting fragments of ancient eggshells. For many, this is their first and only glimpse into a vanished world. Children stare up at the moa displays wide-eyed. Scholars scribble notes. Naturalists debate quietly near the towering leg bones. The moa has been moved from legend into science. You pause beside one display case, reading the careful notes written by early paleontologists extinct approximately 400 years prior to European arrival. Hunted by Polynesian settlers, coexisted with the Haast's eagle. The words feel dry and clinical. A few sentences to capture the end of an empire that lasted millions of years. But standing there, you remember the living creatures, the way their shaggy feathers swayed in the breeze, the slow, rhythmic sway of their necks, the heavy thud of their footsteps on mossy trails. You remember the booming calls that once echoed through the valleys, and the silent disappearance that followed. You follow the museum visitors back outside, where city streets now cut across what were once moa feeding grounds. Buildings rise where forests once stood. Cars and trains hum where herds once roamed. The land carries their memory beneath layers of stone and asphalt. Even now, scientists continue to study these bones. Modern genetic analysis provides new clues about the moa's evolutionary history, connecting dots across continents and revealing their distant relatives. Every fossil unearthed offers another puzzle piece to the moa's long story. But the living creatures themselves remain gone, vanished before any camera could capture their awkward grace. The more humans learn about the moa, the more haunting their absence becomes. And yet, deep in the public imagination, they never fully disappear. The moa continues to walk through legend science, and the collective dream of what once was and what might have been. Had things unfolded differently, the world spins forward. The old forests thin beneath farmland and cities. The moa, long extinct, seemed destined to remain only as bones in dusty museum halls. But now something new stirs. A question whispered in laboratories and university lecture halls, one that would have sounded like pure fantasy not long ago. Could we bring them back? You walk slowly through a sleek glass-walled genetics lab. Fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. Machines beep and whir. Rows of refrigerated storage hold tiny vials. Fragments of DNA extracted from ancient moa bones. carefully recovered from dry caves, and protected maidens. Here's your mainstream fact. In recent years, scientists have successfully extracted partial DNA sequences from Moa fossils. Though much of the genetic code has degraded over centuries enough, fragments remain to offer tantalizing glimpses into their biology. We now know their closest living relatives are the tiny flightless kiwi, New Zealand's most famous avian survivor. Technicians hover over microscopes, analyzing strands of ancient genetic material. Computers model sequences that have been broken, damaged, or lost altogether, attempting to reconstruct what the full Moa genome might have looked like. It's delicate, painstaking work, more like assembling a million-piece jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. And here's your quirky tidbit. Scientists have humorously referred to this process as genetic archaeology, not just digging through dirt, but digging through code, brushing away digital debris in hopes of resurrecting long-lost creatures. Historians and ethicists still argue whether bringing the Moa back is even possible or wise. The idea falls into the growing field of de-extinction, the attempt to revive extinct species using modern genetic technology. Cloning, gene editing, even using closely related living species as surrogates all have been discussed. You pause at a large touchscreen display where proposed models play on loop kiwi embryos, being altered, carefully modified to reactivate dormant Moa traits. A longer leg here, a stouter beak there. In theory, by gradually editing kiwi DNA, scientists might one day recreate something very close to a Moa. But this leads to deeper questions, ones that echo through the lab as scientists debate quietly nearby. If we can build one, is it truly a Moa? Would it behave like the Moa we lost? And where would we even put it? The world the Moa once ruled is not the world that exists today. Much of their original habitat has been cleared for farming or urban development. The forests they shaped are now tangled differently without their grazing. Even the Haast's eagle, their ancient predator, is gone. You step into a conference hall where environmentalists, biologists, and Maori leaders gather around long tables. The conversation grows more passionate here. Some advocate for revival, arguing that bringing the Moa back could help restore ecological balance, allowing native plants to resume old evolutionary relationships, rebuilding damaged systems and offering powerful educational opportunities. Others caution strongly, reviving Moa may not address the deeper environmental problems we face. Could a resurrected Moa truly survive? Would it become a zoo exhibit? Could its presence cause new unintended harm? And importantly, who gets to decide? You listen to a Maori elder speak softly but firmly. The Moa are gone because of us. That lesson matters. Bringing them back might dishonor their story if we forget why they vanished. You feel the weight of those words. The Moa were not wiped out by a random misfortune. Their extinction was rapid, direct, and fully tied to human arrival. Reviving them might allow us to witness their towering grace once more, but it might also risk reducing them to living curiosities, detached from their long and tragic history. Outside the lab, you walk through a quiet wildlife reserve, where small kiwi shuffle through thick underbrush under the careful watch of conservationists. These tiny relatives of the Moa have survived against all odds, adapting to a world that became smaller and harder with each passing century. You pause and imagine, could these small survivors one day share their forests with towering cousins once again? The idea feels both thrilling and deeply uneasy. For now, the Moa remain extinct, but for the first time in thousands of years, the question isn't whether they can return. It's whether they should. And the debate, like so many parts of the Moa story, remains beautifully, frustratingly unresolved. The air feels heavier today. You've reached the end of your long walk through time, and the forests of New Zealand have grown quiet again, but this time not because of Moa, not because of Haast's eagle, simply because the echoes have finally faded. And yet, even in their absence, the Moa's presence lingers everywhere you turn. You stand atop a hillside, looking out over a patchwork of rolling farmland, fragmented native forest, winding rivers and distant cities. It's hard to picture that this very landscape once swayed under the rhythm of Moa herds, wandering through heads bobbing gently as they browsed from towering shrubs, their booming calls rolling down these same valleys. Here's your mainstream fact even today. New Zealand's entire ecology still bears the scars of losing the Moa. Many plants remain overprepared for browsing giants that no longer exist. Certain seeds never travel far, lacking the huge birds that once swallowed and dispersed them. Ecosystem gaps created by their loss remain unfilled centuries later. But you see more than just loss. You follow a group of conservationists as they walk along a narrow trail. They point out native trees still thriving, discuss efforts to restore bird populations, and share stories about new challenges introduced: pests, habitat, loss, climate shifts. And even though no Moa thud through the underbrush anymore, many of these people carry the Moa story forward, teaching children, guiding researchers, protecting the fragments that remain. The past may be unreachable, but the lessons are very much alive. You pause by a small visitor center tucked into the bush. Inside, children gather beneath a towering, reconstructed Moa skeleton, their necks craning upward as they imagine what it might have been like to stand next to something so enormous, so strange, so magnificent. And here's your quirky tidbit, even in pop culture. The Moa continues to haunt imagination. They've appeared in films, novels, stamps, and even quirky roadside attractions, promising Moa sightings. The bird that no one alive has seen continues to walk through New Zealand's collective dreamscape. Historians still argue what exactly the Moa's legacy should teach us. Was it simply an inevitable victim of human progress? A cautionary tale of overhunting? An early warning about our ability to collapse entire ecosystems? Perhaps it's all of those. You walk back outside as the late afternoon sun slants low, casting long shadows across the land. The trees sway gently. Insects hum softly in the warm air. Small native birds dart through the branches singing the songs of survivors. And somewhere, though you know it's only in your imagination, you can almost hear a deep booming call roll across the hills. A final echo from a world long gone. The Moa's story isn't just about extinction. It's about how fragile even the most dominant creatures can be. About how quickly an ancient balance can collapse. About the quiet power of choices made by people who may never have understood their consequences. As the sky darkens, you turn and walk slowly down the trail, leaving the forest behind but carrying the Moa story with you. They may be gone, but we still remember. And now, as our journey draws to a close, let's let the story settle gently, like dusk settling across the old New Zealand forests. You've walked among giants, watched them sway in peaceful rhythm, heard their low booming calls, pulsed through valleys, and witnessed the quiet unraveling of a world once perfectly balanced. From towering Moa grazing beneath ancient trees, to the sharp-eyed Haast's eagle circling above, this was a land unlike anywhere else on Earth. Their world was simple until we arrived. And in those few short centuries, entire species vanished, slipping quietly out of existence. Yet, even in their absence, they continued to teach us about how quickly balance can tip, about how interconnected life truly is, and about how our smallest actions ripple far beyond our sight. Tonight, as you rest, let your mind drift gently back to those misty forests. Picture the giant birds slowly ambling beneath towering ferns, the whisper of leaves above the distant hush of ocean waves on far-off shores. The moa are gone, but for these last quiet moments, you've walked beside them once more. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts soften. The echoes fade now, blending into the hum of the present. The world turns and you're safe here, wrapped in the quiet comfort of ancient stories. Good night.